Now that we've talked about materials, let's get started with piecing. Improv piecing has been around for quite some time, and it's quite fun and liberating at the same time. And you get to explore and let your hair down and don't have to worry about rules or any sort of measurement. You just kind of cut and sew. So let's get started. I have my fabric here, and I'm using sort of around like a half yard of fabric. Again, you can use fat quarters, you can use scraps. It's really a strip project, so you could use a roly-poly if you want. But what we're going to start out with is your main print of your project. This is sort of your hero print, and then all the other prints sort of coordinate with it. So what I like to do is come up with one size that's going to be the rectangle for the log cabin. Log cabin, that center block is your home block, and then you build the cabin as you go around it. And that's where your strips are going to come in at. So decide what size you want, and you could do any size rectangle you want. Just remember that you're going to need 2 of them because you're making 2 mini quilts. So we're going to go 5 by 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm cutting multiple layers here because it'll save me some time for the 2 pieces that I need. And then let's get a 7. And I'm just going to cut off my edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, and I'll save that for later. And I actually have 4 here, which is pretty good because if you mess up, you can always start over. So here's the 2 rectangles that we're going to start out with. This is our center log cabin piece. And then you're going to use your strips to build around it. So, and these are some strips that I had in my stash. Now the fun part is deciding what you want where. And I don't necessarily love the print on print, so maybe I'll use this piece later. Maybe we'll start out with this navy because there's a great contrast here. So all you're going to do is you're going to start on the outside edges, so your left and right, and then you're going to build around it. So what I love to do is just to give myself a little bit of room, I will measure out and then just cut a little strip for there. Cut a little strip for here. And then you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So imagine that this is already sewn up. You'll need a strip for up here. And this needs to be just a little bit bigger so I can capture that seam allowance. And there we go. You can start to see the log cabin take shape. Now comes the fun part. Now comes the improv piecing. So you're going to take your first 2 pieces that you cut over to your sewing machine. And we're using a regular stitch length. You don't have to have anything super fancy. Coordinating thread, I'm using white because it matches perfectly. And all you're going to do is take your strips and your rectangle. And what I like to do with this first strip is kind of start off of the rectangle just a little bit. And you line it up with the corner of the rectangle. And then you kind of just give it a small little angle here. And you're just going to sew following your first strip, which for me is the navy. Okay, now we're ready. And you're just going to follow the first block there. You're good. Now what I like to do is go ahead and sew my other block on because it saves me a little bit of time. It's called chain piecing, when you can do multiple piecing at one time. So same thing, you're just going to start in your corner. We're giving it a little bit of an angle here. All right, now that we have these sewn together, we're going to trim away the excess fabric. You're just going to follow your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Rotate, cut the other side off. And then we're going to press these back, and we always press to the dark side. Set our seams. All right, now we have the beginning of our log cabin. And it's a little bit, you know, off from our rectangle piece. That's totally okay. So now you're going to take the strip that you cut for here. And same thing that you did before, you're going to sort of give it a little bit of an angle. And you're totally going off of the blue strip that you sewed on before, so you're going to start here and sew. And you're just going to follow sewing this strip here to create your 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, and now we need to trim our seam allowance away. And that got rid of the extra fabric we had before. And now on this time, I'm going to turn this over and actually trim these 2 tail pieces away because it'll help me when I join the next layer of our log cabin. So following the first 2 that we put on, we'll just trim this off. Trim this off. Now we can iron back. Set our seams, press it back. And there is the start of our log cabin block. And you can start to see the improv wonkiness show up here, which looks great. It's adding so much character to our block. So now let's add our 3rd layer. I think this is where we should go with the white, and then we can finish with the small floral. That's going to look nice with our green binding. So we'll cut some strips, again, just using 2.5 inch strips, nothing fancy. You could use wider strips if you wanted and trimmed it down, that's totally fine too. Give me a good clean edge here. 2.5, and I'll cut a few, that way I have some to play with. 2.5 and 2.5. That should be enough. So we'll come back to our first block and we'll lay our pieces out. So that looks pretty good for there. This looks pretty good for here. And I can use this for another project later. And then we need one for the top. Again, we want to overlap so we have enough room to play with. And save that for later. Now we can start sewing. It's the same process as what you did before. This time, because we sewed this way, I might actually turn it this way and sew down. Again, it's totally up to you. This is what I love about improv. It's like freestyling. Okay, then we'll add our other piece to it. All right, and we'll trim our 1/4 inch seam allowance again. Remember, we want to press to the dark side, so we want the navy blue to be on the bottom. Set our seams. Give that a good press. All right. So now we need to add our top piece, the same as before. So this one's sloping down, so maybe I'll have this one go up slightly. Make sure I'm catching my seam allowance. Yeah. All right, trim our seam allowance off. And cut our tails from our long piece off. And notice I'm not squaring anything up. We're going to square up at the end. So we're going to leave it really wonky until we get to the end. Okay. Set our seams. Make sure everything's nice and flat on the back. All right, now we're going to add our final layer, our final log cabin pieces, and this is going to be our floral. All right, so we've ironed out our last strip here, and we're all done adding all the layers to our log cabin. Now, you could keep going if you wanted to, just depends on what size you want it to finish at, but I feel like this is a good stopping point for me, especially with the binding that I'm at. Next, we need to trim up our mini quilt, and I like to use the marks on my cutting mat as a good starting point, and I like to start with my hero print and sort of square it up from there and go around. So I'm going to find the closest line so I don't have to cut that much off. That looks pretty good. Okay. Then you're going to rotate it and cut the sides off, and you're going to line up the bottom with your cutting mat. And let's see, I can come over a little bit. I don't have to cut that much off. Rotate again, lining up the side and the bottom. Yeah, that looks nice. Okay. Rotate one more time. Lining up your bottom, side, and top. That's cutting it a little close, but I think we'll be okay. And there we go. There you have your log cabin seeing double 1/2 mini quilt top. And now you're going to repeat the same process to make your second one, but keep in mind that you're going to go reverse. So your hero print will still be in the same place, but then you're going to piece in the opposite direction. And you can also rotate it too if you want, but I like to think of it as the reverse. Next up, we're going to talk about putting our quilt sandwich together and matchstick quilting.